It's easy to read today's gospel and get caught up in soil types. Jesus explains the parable, and yet we still feel the need to dig more deeply into the analogy and try to make clear who among us is the rockiest or the thorniest or the richest soil. Because there's a clear preference for good soil in the story, and that soil could nurture and produce the best and the biggest and the brightest and the tallest and the prettiest and the most abundant of plants. But if we get so caught up in first looking down at the soil type, we may learn a lot about ourselves and about our lives and about our communities, but we may miss entirely the opportunity to learn about God, because we are not the sower in this story. Yes, we're called to share the good news far and wide. Yes, we should tell the stories of Jesus loud and clear for all to hear. Yes, we should know the worth of the message more than be concerned about the perfect place for it to land. But ultimately, we shouldn't leap to the assumption that we are the sowers. We could maybe just leave this starring role to God. And what we hear in these words today is about the abundant grace that God offers. Because with utter abandon and incredible extravagance, this wasteful sower scatters seeds all over the place. In the most inhospitable places, in the least likely places, in the obvious places, but also in the places that no one expects anything to come of it. Anyone who's worked hard to collect seeds for next year's harvest, anyone who's invested in this precious resource, anyone who depends on a crop's yield to feed their family has to hear this story and wonder at the wastefulness in it. If it's obvious that nothing's going to come of those seeds, why squander them in all of those places? Because God's immense grace is so abundant and so vast that it can't be wasted. Scattering some of it on some suboptimal soil neither limits what can be scattered on the more fertile soil, nor does it waste what is scattered on that less fertile soil. This is not the first time that we hear our God reminding us of God's bigness, God's extravagance, God's abundance. Remember in the story of Abraham, how God asks Abraham to count the number of the stars or the grains of the sand. Remember in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, already an abundant task in and of itself, but how many baskets were left over? Everyone had their fill, and then the disciples went around and gathered 12 more baskets from 5 loaves and 2 little fishes, enough for everyone to eat and to get their fill, and then to have 12 baskets besides. Because with God, there is plenty to go around. And so God chooses to be equally present. God's kingdom is equally at hand in places that we might not think are good places for gardens of God's goodness. But through thorns and through drought and through rocks and hard places, God continues to scatter seeds of hope and peace and gentleness and courage and grace, without regard for how deeply those things will take root, how long they will last, whether they're going to flourish or whether they're going to falter. God scatters abundantly God's amazing grace, because God is big. They say that there's a connection between generosity and gratitude. It makes sense that cultivating a culture of gratitude in your life often correlates to simultaneously cultivating a culture of generosity. Because in offering gratitude for all that we have or are or have been gifted, we often feel compelled to share from that abundance with the people around us. Not simply financially, obviously, if we're well loved and we seek to love others well. If we're grateful for our health and for our families, we seek to ensure good health for the families of all. And maybe this is how we live out this parable. In recognition of God, the abundant seed scatterer, and with gratitude for the grace that has been showered on us, we may begin to then share this grace with others. And maybe we do then cultivate the soil. God scatters abundantly and without boundary, but there's a clear preference for the good soil in this story. And so, with gratitude, perhaps we're called to bring nutrients to poor soil. Out of our gratitude, maybe we redirect streams of water to the dry places. And with deep gratitude, perhaps we roll up our sleeves and do the hard work of getting out both the tiny stones and the large rocks which crowd out abundant crops. But interestingly, research shows that the correlation works both ways. And so cultivating a culture of generosity in your life brings along with it a culture of gratitude. And so maybe in the weariness of this season, you're not quite ready to start with gratitude. But if you start with generosity instead, gratitude can follow. Where and what are you being called to generously scatter right now? Not out of fear or caution, but out of abundance. Not because you know exactly how it will turn out, but precisely because you don't. May you know with certainty this week that God's seeds are falling in even the most unlikely and unexpected of places. But may God's seeds of grace fall afresh on you this week as well. Whether you're feeling prickly or hardened of heart or vibrantly alive, know that God's words fall on and in and through and around you to light your path, to fill your heart. And for that, we can all be grateful. Amen.